Welcome to another podcast and video interview series for citiesabc.com, a cities that we profile the global leaders, researchers, and academics that are shaping the world, and as well coming up with innovation and different angles that can actually improve humanity, our cities, and the way we deal with our challenges, especially in a time of very disturbing areas like healthcare and financial and economicals with the pandemic of COVID-19 coronavirus. So today we have with us Miguel Amaral, that is a PhD researcher in industrial engineering, specialized in the areas of entrepreneurship, and as well part of the Center for Innovation, Technology and Policy and Research, IN Plus, from the University of Técnico in Portugal, and has been as well working with the MIT. So Miguel has been working in multiple areas of entrepreneurship, studying the different dynamics in entrepreneurship, and as well how innovation and special concepts like innovation frugal can be applied from the theory to the practice. And he has as well a significant career in the university and the academia. Welcome to this our series, Miguel. It's an honor to have you here. So to start, and I think having a bit of background about you. So can you tell us a bit about your education and how do you come to the place where you are doing a lot of things between Lisbon, Portugal, but as well the US with the MIT and as well in India. A bit of background and history. You're still very young, but
not that much. But yeah, so my background is I studied and then I did this master in technology management and innovation, and my PhD is also in industrial engineering and innovation. Industrial engineering and management. I did different types of training, and I'm very curious about many different fields. So, for example, I studied cinema. I did another master on cinema and communication sciences, and also, for example, a 3-year course in arts, painting. I'm very much connected to arts as well. And so I have a very diversified, let's say, background and base of knowledge. I like many different things. And I like to connect them whenever it's possible, to connect all these dots and try to use it for some specific purposes. And so I'm a professor at Técnico, which is the engineering school from the Lisbon University. And I'm connected to the engineering and management department and teaching some courses like technology-based entrepreneurship, um, public policy, innovations, all these kinds of courses to master students and PhD students essentially. And I've been doing research on entrepreneurship in the last years, and also innovation, technological change, trying to understand these dynamics in society. So this is part what I've been doing as an academic, but also in the academia, I'm trying to connect students and do something in a very practical way, bringing some ideas and students to the field and some interesting projects lately.
So in terms of one of the main areas that you've been working is precisely the areas of innovation and entrepreneurship, and as well the dynamics of entrepreneurship. So we are in a particular sensitive moment, but just on the research you've been doing, can you tell us some of the highlights, how you've been researching the concepts of innovation and entrepreneurship, and as well coming from an engineer background, the areas of technology applied to innovation, to startups and to SMEs and different companies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm involved in many different types of research projects and supervising many theses. And sometimes these topics are, of course, they all connect with technological change or with innovation and entrepreneurship, but in very specific subtopics, let's say. For example, I've been involved in a project in Portugal together with Carnegie Mellon University in the United States, and we were studying, for example, aeronautics in Portugal. So the research question was, with because we had this big company, Embraer, a big aeronautics company. They started 2 plants in Portugal 10 years ago. Uh, and then our research question was to check if this kind of dynamics would stimulate the supply chain, and new companies, new startups would join this industry. So basically, we wanted to understand the dynamics of this industry in Portugal. And of course, in order to do that, we had to look at different dimensions of these issues. When you talk about this innovation, about change, you should look at technology, you should look at people. So we also looked a lot at what kind of resources we need, what kind of people, skilled people we have in Portugal that can join this industry. So how are these skills evolving? So you have to look at different dimensions, not only technology, of course. So actually, you can predict technological trajectories by looking at people, new professions, what people are doing, how people concentrate in geographically. So if you just look at data, and if you see a lot of engineers concentrated in one region, it means that maybe there's some technology going on there. So you see, you can look at these technological trajectories from many different standpoints. And so that was one project involving many people. Um, but I've been involved with many projects. For example, looking at open innovation, which is the capacity of companies to connect with different partners, and if that has an impact on innovation performance, that kind of topics. Also entrepreneurship. So what are the determinants of starting a company? uh, what is the role played by human capital in starting and developing a business? So many different topics.
So there's sometimes a delay, so I'll try to see. So
Mhm.
in terms of technological change, this is a massive topic and special right now with what is happening around the world. But before we go to the more present moments, so how do you define technological change, especially from an academic and from a scientific perspective? Because this is probably the biggest thing that has been affecting humanity with fourth industrial revolution, so-called fourth industrial revolution, but as well, like you said, with all the dynamics that are affecting society, both from a let's say if you look at the different angles of innovation between the research angle of the universities, but as well in relationship with the economical systems, with the political systems and so forth. So how has been your angle in terms of the technological part of the change, and how you've been looking at this?
So technological change is a very broad concept, of course, and you can look at it from many different angles. I would say that it will be necessarily connected with some degree of innovation, because if you are talking about change, basically we are thinking about how technology can shape our lives, how can change the way we live, how can it solve some problems. And so it necessarily, in my vision, it connects with innovation. When you talk about innovation, of course, you have many different ways to conceptualize it. But usually, I follow the Oslo Manual, which is a document that is being pretty much used by the European Commission to compare actually innovation across countries. And so it's based on a survey that is done annually to many countries in Europe. And so they define in this Oslo manual, they define innovation as some process, okay, uh, some kind of change that can be significantly different or radically different from what was being done before. Like, right? It can be organizational change, it can be a marketing change, um, a marketing innovation, it can be a process innovation or a product innovation, right? So you have these four types, four ways of looking at innovation. organizational process, product, and marketing. And it has to be something significantly improved or totally new that can actually solve problems and be used by people in their day-to-day life. So you have to have a market for that solution or people using it. Otherwise, I would say it's not innovation. Uh, and so I think that's the most common definition. This is being used by many authors. And so I think technological change connects with technological innovation, whether it is process innovation with new technologies, product innovations. So I think it connects with innovation, as I told you. And then, so basically, you have inventions, right? You have people starting new products, new solutions. So an invention happens when you go from an idea, which is intangible, to something more tangible. So if you try to make your idea explicit, if it's going from tacit to explicit, and if, for example, if you patent this idea, or if you do some technical document explaining your idea, your technology-based idea, uh, you may have an invention. The difference between an invention and an innovation is the market. So if it's just an invention and nobody wants to use your patent, your invention, or your technology, if people don't find a purpose for that, um, it's not never going to reach the market, which means it's never going to become an innovation. It's only just an invention. So you have all these different levels. You have inventions, you have ideas that they can lead to inventions. These inventions can lead to innovations, and entrepreneurship is like the mediator. It's like a vehicle to take these inventions to the market, right? So that's the importance of entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurs usually they have um, it depends, because you also have many different types of entrepreneurs, but usually there is this idea that the entrepreneur is someone who see the opportunity to take this technology or this invention to the market, to make a product out of this technology, out of this idea. And
So
so when the entrepreneur does that, it means that it's going to take it to the market, and everybody will be able to use it. That is an innovation. Yeah.
So when we look at, I think, special technological innovation, and I think I would like to touch a bit in your work with University of Technic, which is probably the leading engineering university in Portugal. Um, how do you see the relationship between the quadruple, if you look at the quadruple or the quadruple in helix, or as well the quintuple helix, that is between the different areas of society, universities, industry, and of course, going forward more and more the citizens or the environment. How do you see that, for instance, from the angle of the University Technic, the university where you've been working? Because I think it's very important right now to understand, especially how Portugal has been advancing and leaping forward, I think, quite substantial in the last 10 years. But that angle between the university, the industry, the society, and as well the citizens. Do you see that quadruple or quintuple angle working in terms of innovation and transformational change, the idea of technology?
Yeah, of course, I think it works, but it takes time. It involves a lot of trust between all these actors, these social actors. So what happens is, for example, Technico is maybe the most, or one of the most schools in Portugal, which is more autonomous in terms of budget. So we have a lot of collaboration with the industry, and of course the public school. So part of our budget is public, but a very high percentage is coming from these collaborations with industry. So actually we collaborate with firms, we solve problems, we engage in joint projects. And so that is very important, and that is a reality. It's happening everywhere in the world. But it's not easy, right? So you have many different barriers, let's say, or constraints and different mindsets between these different worlds. You have academics doing research, which takes time, right? So if I'm supervising a PhD, he or she are going to study some topic for 4 or 5 years, dedicate full time to the study of one specific topic, and so I have to follow them. We have to work together. They might collaborate with companies, but when you see this perspective from the research, it takes time. So you need a lot of time to learn and to develop ideas and to conceptualize, to think about the problem. And in companies, the timing is different. So companies had real problems to solve immediately. So they cannot wait 3-4 years. So they have to solve it. And sometimes they have to take decisions based on the available information, and that's it. They cannot spend a lot of time doing research. Some companies do it. They have a more long-term perspective, but that involves costs, that involves an organizational culture, which also takes time to create. So you see, you have these two different worlds, and sometimes it's difficult for them to connect. But when it happens, I think it's very productive for both parts. So there are a lot of incentives also for universities to engage with companies and vice versa. And even public incentives. There's some programs implying that so this call for projects and funding aimed at these collaborations. So this funding can support these collaborations, and more, I think in Portugal and in many countries, we are working a lot also on science diffusion, so trying to reach other types of publics, maybe also non-specialized people. So people have to learn to understand what is technology. So what's the purpose of technology? Maybe in a non-technical language as well. So universities also have the responsibility to do that, to explain to broader audiences what are the results of our research. Then we have another angle, which is the policy making. So basically, you have universities, research institutes, you have companies, you have citizens in general, and you have policymakers who also benefit from this connection, because this research can inform policymaking decisions, and so policymakers can also benefit from this knowledge when they establish their policies, when they design their programs and all that. So that's what's happening everywhere, but as I said, there are many barriers, I think. But in Portugal, things are improving a lot in the last years. More and more, I think, technology, innovation, entrepreneurship. These words are very much common nowadays. Everybody is following what's happening in the world, and everybody's connected with these changes, right? Maybe 10 years ago, I think for researchers, of course, if you are working with technology on innovation, it's pretty much normal. But maybe 10 years ago, for the normal citizen in Portugal, this idea of entrepreneurship, of the technological innovation, of the role of technology in society, it was not that strong than it is nowadays.
So the university where you are a professor it's one of the universities that have been creating probably some of the leading politicians in Portugal, especially ministers of science and technology and a lot of other ministers leading the country. So there's a component of as well relationship between, of course, the research university and the political, and as well the policy making, by all means. Did you saw so in terms of practical elements, and as well, for instance, you are part of the IN Plus, which is the Center for Innovation, Technology and Policy Research, that is a cross-disciplinary research venue acting since 1998. It was actually created by the present, I think one of the creators was the present Minister of Science and University Education in Portugal. So can you tell this relationship between, first of all, of course, this research and the angle of policy, society, and politics as well? And do you see a progress on that level in terms of creation of companies that have interesting dynamics? Because, and just to put the question a bit more complex, but I think it's important for us. If you look at the US, a huge part of the innovation that was created probably in the last 50 years or even 100 years came out of the angle, the investment from the state, from even people don't talk about that, but if you look at Silicon Valley, it started by grants that were initially done by the US government, and then the relationships with the universities of California, all the universities, Stanford and Berkeley, and of course the biggest corporations that we have right now, from the likes of Google to Facebook, and a lot of others were created by or students of the major universities or actually even within the universities. Do you see that happening in Portugal? And how do you see these angles and these dynamics, especially the IN Plus and other work you've been working closer?
Yes, IN Plus, as you said, is a multidisciplinary research center combining things like combustion and people studying, for example, flames. And it started with lasers and this kind of engineering topics, but also a lot of work on smart cities, for example, on sustainability, industrial ecology, circular economy, so all these topics, and finally policy making. And as you said, one of the founders, Manuel Heitor, he started as an engineer and then started diverging a bit into different topics like innovation. So he was maybe one of the first persons in Portugal studying innovation in a more systematic way, involving many partners, researchers from all over the world. So I think he generated these dynamics around innovation and all these topics, technological innovation, and obviously with the focus on policy. So actually, I think that was a very coherent path because he's now the minister, and so he was really interested in this topic. So these made all these different interests from people integrating IN Plus made IN Plus a very multidisciplinary and interesting place to be. And so there's a lot of things going on in the center. And what you mentioned is this policy dimension. Yes, I think so. It touched many different things. So the policy dimension is there because as a researcher, of course, you have freedom to choose your topic. So I don't impose my students to do this or that. I follow what. Of course, there's a broad topic, a domain of knowledge or interest, but then they are free to choose their topics, and I think within this freedom that you have to have as a researcher, of course, you may be interested in looking not only at at technology as a black box, but how it relates with what is outside the box, with all these forces that surrounds this black box of technology, and especially with policy. So many students are interested in looking at how the results of my scientific work can impact on policymakers, practitioners. Okay, so not only academics. So I think research first, if research should be connected to some contribution, some academic contribution, because it is scientific research, right? So this is I would say the basic. If you do research, you need to contribute to scientific to the scientific body of knowledge. But of course, it can go up some levels. So you may want to do that, but also have implications for practitioners, or maybe your work may also have implications for policymakers. So you can have layers and layers of contributions and implications. And I think more and more, going strictly to your question, so more and more at IN Plus and at IST and in many places in the world, of course, people are looking at this policy dimension. So how can my results really connect to the way things happen, to all these decision-making processes in the world? And for example, You mentioned the role of states, right? The fact that states, for example, you mentioned Silicon Valley, and the fact that it was a lot of what happened there was publicly funded, and so that is true, and it happens also in many places. So governments sometimes they do this technology push. So you see companies sometimes cannot afford doing research on very cost intensive fields, or if there is, especially in very emergent areas, if the results are not predictable. So the risk is very high. So usually governments, they face this risk and they invest in technologies, and sometimes in general purpose technologies, sometimes without even necessarily knowing what is going to happen in the end or what is the market needs. So it's just an interesting technology, and strategically some government believes that we should invest. Let's suppose, for example, let's talk, for example, about blockchain. um, you may have companies investing in blockchain, maybe smaller or larger companies. But if you talk about some, let's suppose there's the possibility of doing a radically new infrastructure or some real breakthrough in this technology, and it would involve huge huge investments. If there's a lot of risk for companies, so they will not put the money. So they will be a bit um, they are not going to move, maybe. Maybe the government may say, okay, we believe this technology is very important. It's going to change the way we live, and we are going to invest on this technology. So we are going to stimulate, to use this public money to stimulate research on these fields. So they start stimulating research. So they don't have a specific purpose in the market problem right now, but they start doing this, and eventually in 20 years there's a huge body of knowledge, and then the application of all this knowledge is going to happen. And so the same happened, for example, with the laser industry, many industries where the state just invested a lot of money. And then companies, of course, they use this knowledge to also to develop their products. So I think what you mentioned is very much debated and discussed by many authors. And I'm remembering Mariana Mazzucato, for example. She's writing a lot about this, about how states should be entrepreneurial, in the sense that usually we look at states as some entities who just try to solve market failures. So if there's a market failure, the state can intervene. But what she's saying is that the state should not only address market failures, but it should be proactive and entrepreneurial, in the sense that the state should choose strategic domains of knowledge, or strategic, let's say, um, I'm not going to say industries, because nowadays you shouldn't have this sectoral perspective, because things are very much um, across all industries. But so you see, governments can have this attitude of saying, okay, we want to use this money to invest in education, technology, uh, and so we want to be proactive instead of just solving market failures. And so that's the idea of the entrepreneurial state. And I think that's happening more and more. And if you see what's happening now with COVID-19 in Portugal, at least, I'm home, like most everybody in many countries. But what's happening is that people are mobilizing, and in Portugal, for example, we had many universities, research centers, scientists collaborating, trying to find solutions. You have students. I had students doing these 3D printed masks, and everybody's collaborating and using these technology and science to try to solve or mitigate this problem. So I think this is the result of, I would say, the capacity of countries to mobilize and individuals to mobilize and use their knowledge and the technology available to solve this some problem that is that nobody was expecting. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but I think the knowledge we have allows us to deal with this uncertainty. And this capacity is, I think it's wonderful because it's the result of a lot of public investment, private investment, a lot of people working on science and technology. So I think the society is mobilizing, and this is the result of all these investment. So the message is investment on education, on technology. It's fundamental, and it gives very impressive results, even in these uncertainty situations, right?
So one of one of the things that it's particular different in terms of policies and in terms of investment is the difference between Europe, where Portugal is based, and the US. And then, of course, you have India or Asia or Southeast Asia, which is completely different. So I've been working both with Portugal, of course, and you have as assistant professor of the university, you've been with your academic career that as researcher and as well part of this institute, but then you've been working as well with leading universities in the US like Carnegie and as well MIT. So, uh, and in Europe, for instance, there's a much more innovation driven by governments. Whereas in the US, there's some fees and normally some initial funding from the government, but then the industry has to push things forward and it becomes more industry driven. Do you see from your experience working with the major universities, at least especially the Carnegie and MIT, a massive difference between what is happening in terms of innovation in the US and what is happening in Portugal and in Europe, where you are based? And as well in terms of the education, is a big difference or things are more and more similar?
Of course, there are differences, but again, there are many visions on that. For example, as I told you before, um, I was mentioning Mazzucato's work, and she, for example, she gives the example of the iPhone as something that was um, these products. Many of the components of the iPhone have a lot of public funding. So the touch screen, the I don't know, camera, so all these different components, they were publicly funded by during many years. So I think this idea that in Europe everything is public, in the US everything is private. Well, of course, it happens in many domains, but sometimes you also have a lot of public funding, and as I told you, this it happens for during decades. The government is stimulating some technology, or it's just putting money. It's technology push, not necessarily market driven, and then companies then take advantage of this as well. So and then another question is the results of these innovations, because they are captured by private companies. So when these companies have profit, of course they pay taxes, but there's another discussion. So because sometimes they pay taxes not in the country of origin, they pay taxes in other countries if they have their working force in countries like China or whatever. So there's this big discussion about that question, if it's really like that, if the government is not really intervening a lot in the US. I think it is. I think it's also, the government is also investing a lot. It's not only private companies. Um, and so, of course, there are differences because the US is a totally different country, and even the culture is different in many aspects, of course. Um, but okay, so I think that's normal. It's normal that you find differences between these countries, and it depends, of course, on the fact that innovation can also be geographically uh, concentrated. Let's say, for example, life sciences and biotech. In these fields, for example, you have the Bay Area, Boston. So you have many, couple of places in the world where this actually works, because you have investors that really put a lot of money. They really understand about a lot about the business, so they really know what they are doing. And I think in Europe, for example, the level of these levels of investment are not the same. I think the way these business angels or venture capital companies follow these very specific companies in Europe, it's not, maybe in some cases, not that specialized like in the US. So I think you have these different niches of different industries and different technologies that may work better in some region in the world rather than other. So in general, I think that's normal to have all these differences.
So one of the things to follow up still on education and the angles is that, so if you look at the success, or at least the biggest major technology, and it's your area of expertise, the major technology breakthroughs, at least in the last 50 years, that happened in the US. And although Europe has been having a huge amount of innovation, with I think a few couple of exceptions, we didn't achieve to have not even close to the technology. First of all, the number of technology companies that came out, and as well the impact they have in the world. And I think, to be honest, probably if you look at Europe as a whole, and I'm going a bit right now on geopolitics, but Europe, most of the innovation that came out in terms of, I'm talking about mainstream technology, came out of the smart tech city London and the smart city or smart nation right now. I'm talking about billion-dollar companies that have been having a massive effect in terms of the world economy. So Portugal recently got at least 3 or 4 major multi-billion-dollar companies, the so-called unicorns, that have been actually based around the ecosystem of Portugal and the US and Europe, especially UK. How do you see these dynamics in terms of innovation and in terms of the relationship with society? Because in the end of the day, the research and innovation, well, of course, that can be more driven by the state, like you have the case of China and other areas, especially in Asia. But in the case of US, definitely there was of course, the things might change for the next 10, 20 years because Asia is taking over, but definitely there was a massive leadership, which is still going on. Let's be honest. We are using almost all the products we're using are effectively American created or American innovated driven, and then probably assembled in Asia, especially in India and China. So how do you see these dynamics from the policy angle and from the research and education angle, especially you that have been actually working between Europe, US, and as well right now in India?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very hard question, because I don't. I think I don't believe in formulas, because when people talk about these unicorns and gazelles, these high growth companies, uh, everybody's looking for like this secret sauce or this formula that will help them to grow like that, or to have this very fast growing on. And so I think it's very hard, and even from a research perspective, you don't. There's no. We are not certain about what are the determinants of that. If you look at these high growth companies, for example, if these high growth companies, usually the metrics to look at them is consecutive growth of 20% growth per year, I think, during 3 consecutive years. I think that's the metrics, one of the most used metrics. But so let's suppose I grow 20% per year during 3 consecutive years. So I'm a high growth company. If I'm a recent company up to 5 years, we call them gazelles. So these startups that grow very fast. So what's happening is, in many cases, it's not why are these companies interesting, because a small number of companies, these are rare, very rare events, let's say. So it's not usually it's very rare that companies grow a lot on a systematic basis every year. So that's not the majority of companies. It's a very small percentage of companies in all these developed countries. But the interesting fact is that such a small percentage of companies generates a proportionally high percentage of jobs, and that's important. That's why policymakers want to look at these high growth companies. And but the thing is, it's curious that usually the companies that are really growing more and faster, it's not the gazelles, it's not the startups, it's the more mature firms. And I think we don't have enough knowledge nowadays to really understand this phenomenon. Why suddenly this company was growing at a very linear pace, and then it gets exponential or something. I think many people connect it with, it can be because of some specific, let's say, some contracts. So if you get some specific partnership or business, or it can fuel your company, and you can grow a lot immediately because it just happened that you got that specific contract or business. But it may be connected to human capital. If suddenly you really invest in human capital, maybe you can have this growth potential. It can be connected to some technology. So if you develop some new technology, and if it's a radical innovation, it may really impact on this growth of your company. So you can have many reasons for this growth to happen. So my message is that there's no specific formula to understand this high growth, and also unicorns. Why companies, some of the startups really grow? Yeah, because they just maybe they detected some market gap, and they addressed it in a very good way, and they developed the right technology, the right timing. So a lot of variables converging for that to happen. So it's not very easy to explain this phenomenon. But what I mean is, these companies, of course, many of these companies are really changing the way we live, and the way we do things now. And so that's why usually you have these different, when we talk about innovation, if you cross this technological complexity, let's say, if you cross it with the market that you can reach with your product, usually we associate products that have high complexity, sophisticated technology with radical innovation and breakthroughs. But what we are seeing nowadays with the shared economy and all these new trends is that sometimes you don't need really high-tech, very sophisticated technology to reach a lot of people and to develop some breakthrough innovation. So for example, I don't know, everybody talks about Uber and Airbnb. I think these services, they are based on technological platforms which are sophisticated, not that much sophisticated. It's not rocket science, right? But the thing is, it's a very good idea, and people relate with that, and they find it more, let's say, user-friendly, more transparent. I don't know, and that's why they reach a lot of people. So I think it's a mix between all these, between the technological level, the market problem that you address, and all these variables. How do you invest in your innovation inputs? If your company is investing in R&D, in the best people, the best equipment. So if you have a long-term vision instead of a very short long-term vision. So it's very, very complex. It's very hard to isolate the effect of each one of these variables and try to understand exactly what is the formula for the success of these firms. So what I say is that regardless of that, they are really shaping, in many cases, what we are doing right now.
So one of the things that you've been particularly interested is mapping frugal innovation and as well doing research and applying frugal innovation to your work and the academic and as well in real case studies, especially in India. Can you tell us about, first of all, define frugal innovation and second, your work on that area?
Okay, so uh, what happened was that I've been teaching technology-based entrepreneurship for more than 10 years, and usually what I used to do with my students was this traditional business plan, where they should develop some technology-based idea and think about the business model and how to transform these into a product, how to take it to market. And so that was what we were doing for many years. And they were exposed to case studies, usually these case studies that from good universities in the world, Harvard Business School, or so case studies on entrepreneurship, okay, and technology. But suddenly, I think I decided to change that because I noticed that from semester to semester, the ideas were getting very similar, and so all the students were all trying to develop the same things, and usually these simple gadgets with uh, some interest, but not actually very huge impact. And of course, it's only a one semester course, so my expectations is not that they actually develop impressive products and change the world. So it's just a course, but I wanted to adjust it to a more impactful, let's say, outcome and something with actually with more meaning for me as well. And so I was involved with some universities in India, and I decided to do this protocol with in the beginning with 5 universities in India. And and my challenge was that they should give me some problems, local problems, or just prepare some very simple document with explaining a couple of local problems in vulnerable communities, because I wanted to expose my students to a totally different reality. And so these partners in India, they gave me these briefings, and I passed it to my students, and students started addressing these problems, which were totally different from what they knew before. So totally different problems, different mindset, different geographical location. So they had to deal with a lot of uncertainty. So suddenly they were challenged to work on problems coming from India. So they didn't know India. They've never been there. They don't. So that forced the students to do research about India, about that specific region, that specific community, that specific problem, to interact with colleagues from other country. So it opened the mindset of students a lot, and so that was my goal. Of course, we have a lot of problems in Portugal. We don't need to go to India, right? So we have a lot of problems, and we should also address them. But I wanted to do something outside of the boundaries, or outside of the frontier of Portugal, and actually out of Europe as well. So something totally new and uncertain for the students. So they reacted very well, and they did very nice projects. In the beginning, it was very difficult for them, but then they were persistent, and then they did very nice projects. So I had in the beginning 30 students doing this. Then by the end of the semester, I showed these results to my Indian partners. They were really excited by the fact some students were addressing these specific problems, and on using different angles, different approaches. So that generated a stronger connection with these partners and more interest from them. So after this, I joined with this process. I joined with my colleague Ana Carvalho from my department, and she's very much active in sustainability, industrial ecology, and she's doing a lot of research also on frugal innovation. And so we decided to combine what we were doing, and we created this social innovation lab at IST. So the social innovation lab aims um, to bring together these different dimensions of these issues. So basically, we are developing some educational model that addresses these problems, these social innovation issues, and these social impact topics. So what we do is we start with regular courses. We don't need to create new courses about sustainability, or no, we use the courses we already have, where students they are supposed to do some projects on different topics. What we do is we change the challenges. Instead of doing um, some projects that are very much common and traditional, no, we say you have to develop projects with social impact, and so they focus on this challenge. They use the knowledge they acquire in these courses. On it can be, let's say, in my course is technology based entrepreneurship, but it can be from industrial ecology course or from a mechanics, whatever. So they just use whatever they are doing in that course, but applied to a challenge with social impact in the world, with a practical challenge. So that's the first stage of our model. The second stage is that we saw that students, the classroom was not enough, so they needed some space. So we created this physical lab where they can go and experiment, and they can use tools to develop prototypes. They can just do meetings. They can do whatever they want in the space 24 hours per day. So we combined something happening within the classroom with something happening outside the classroom in this lab. And finally, we combine it with mobility. So we want to also to go out of the university and out of the country. So what I did 3 months ago, I took students to India. So basically, they do this regular course. They address this social challenge. They do a project, and in the end, they go to India or to any of these countries, right? So that is very much appealing for students. They really like this process. This experience of going to India after the course totally changes the way they see these cultural differences, the way they see technology, the way they see the entrepreneurship, the way they solve problems. So I think what I mean is this is happening all over the world, but separately. So you have mobility programs, you have courses focused on social issues, social impact. You have fab labs, you have many different types of labs and places where students can work together. But what we are doing is doing something integrated. We are bringing these three dimensions together in one semester. So I think that's interesting. And actually, we won this pedagogical innovation prize at IST with this idea, together with other projects as well. Um, but um, but I think it's exciting because we are not changing the contents of the courses, but we are changing the impact of what students are doing. That's very interesting. So these students, they went to India with me, and they had to implement this project in a village. So they faced many problems in this village. They didn't have electricity or water, or so they had to figure out how to implement this project, and they had to do some field work. They had to interact with local people. So that is a huge experience, I think, for a student who is finishing. So I think that will make these students better engineers, better professionals, and people who see the world not only as Portugal or Europe, but as something really broad and with many different issues and problems. So actually, I see Portugal and Europe as a very like a drop in the ocean. This is not, I would say, the real world. What's happening all over the world is totally different. So you have many people living without conditions, many social problems. And so I think students sometimes they don't have this notion that things are so different. Of course, they have some general notion. They see the news, and but it's totally different when you actually have to study what's happening there, and you have to relate with that people. You have to go there and provide some ideas and interact and learn essentially. So I think the goal here is not to go there and reinvent the wheel, but it's essentially for students to learn and to become better persons and professionals, right? So this is, of course, this is focused on social impact, but it's very much connected to frugal innovation. And going also back to your question, what is frugal innovation? It's very simple. It's using the minimum resources to do the maximum possible and for the most people possible. So, and usually the concept is connected to base of the pyramid, uh, group groups of people. So people with very little resources, the most vulnerable people, right, and communities. And so the goal is that students are really frugal, that they use the less resources possible. Uh, so it's also about optimization. Sometimes you have to reinvent something with almost without resources. In some other cases, you have the resources, but you don't need to spend all that energy. You don't need to spend all those materials. So maybe you can optimize and have the same result with less consumption of raw materials. So that is the concept. And I think it's pretty much used in the world. In India, I think India is reference in this of frugal innovation. They call it many times Jugaad innovation. So Jugaad is in Portugal. We also have this similar expression to talk about the capacity to improvise and to do something without resources. So in India, they also do it, and they call it Jugaad, and it's getting pretty much established, let's say, concept. And you can find books on the topic. You can find papers looking at Jugaad, and basically, but it can be also debatable. Jugaad, in the one hand, it's positive because it means that people are doing something without a lot of resources, and they are solving problems, and that's wonderful. But on the other hand, some people criticize because they say, okay, we are doing things without resources, but it shouldn't be like that. So the government should provide more resources, or basically this is not the right way of doing things. It's just an improvisation, and not everything should be improvised. So I think in between, I'm positioned in between these. I think it's frugal innovation is not an excuse uh, for governments not to invest on innovation and just say, okay, you should be frugal, or you do whatever you need without resources. So that shouldn't be an excuse for that. Um, but yeah, so it has to be something balanced, and that's it. So, for example, another interesting issue when we talk about frugal innovation, usually people connect it to low tech, because just develop some simple solution I don't know, without technology, or with very um little technology. But it's not really like that. For example, if you look at the Tata Nano, Tata Nano is this car model in India, um, developed by Tata. So they developed this small, very cheap car, um, which is considered a frugal product because it's a very inexpensive car. It serves the purpose of taking you from point A to point B, but it's very cheap. So they took out all the not necessary materials components. So they reshaped the car so that it could be very cheap and functional. So that is also frugal innovation, and it's not necessarily low tech. So even if you optimize a car, even if it gets much cheaper and with less materials and components, it's still a car. It requires a lot of technology. So it's not a low tech activity. It's a medium high activity or high. So I'm talking about technology intensity, right? So I think this frugal concept can be transversal to different technology intensity levels. It's not necessarily low tech, like many people say. So I think, yeah, it offers the possibility, at least to students, to learn that they can do a lot with the minimum resources, because they are a bit addicted to high tech, and everything they do is high tech, and they believe they always need a lot of resources. If they don't have the ideal resources, they can do nothing. That's totally wrong. They can do a lot with less resources, and that's the message I'm trying to pass to my students.
That's amazing, and it touched a lot of the angle between innovation, social impact, and as well how can we change the world. And so probably for the last wrap up, because we've been actually already going through 1 hour, although there's a lot of interesting things we could go for more, but I think the purpose of keeping more or less around 1 hour. So one of the things that is critical, and probably to finalize, is how the universities, how entrepreneurs can cope with everything that is happening right now with the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. How do you see that from your angle of expertise, and what is the message of hope that you have as well? You touch frugal innovation, but it's critical right now because, for instance, if you look right now in entrepreneurs, or depends on the studies, depends on the country, but for instance, in the US, I think 1 in 5 business or even 2 in 5 business are actually disappearing or going down. A lot of startups are as well failing because, of course, they have no liquidity or no capacity to move forward. So this is affecting the world, especially in business and in education as well. A lot of universities are getting substantial damage, especially the ones that are with international students. So how do you see that from their angle, and as well in positive message, because you are very focused as well on social impact?
Well, we are still going through this problem, and it's very hard to do these predictions. But I think it's obvious that this is going to lead to some economic crisis, and the effect of this is going to last for some years, I believe. I would say 3-4 years. So it's not just uh, waiting for this emergency state to finish, and then we just go out and we start working again and everything is the same. Of course not. It's going to be bad during the next years. And in Portugal, for example, many companies are in these layoff processes, sending people home. These workers are getting a lower wage, because the government is complementing this wage, and so the worker still gets the wage, but so the government splits with the companies. There are many measures to support people. I would say public measures, but also it's amazing. I think all these volunteers and people doing amazing stuff, just trying to help. And so entrepreneurs, it depends on the type of business, but if, very small businesses, which account in Portugal, it accounts for 98% of our economy. So basically, we have 98% of micro or very small businesses, and so the impact is huge because these small businesses, they have to close, they have to wait. Sometimes they don't have the liquidity, the means to actually to survive during this period. So it's going to be very hard, and it's already being very complicated. But I think it's cyclical, and these problems happened before in society, and people readjust, just adapt, and I think that's our capacity as humans, right, to adapt to all these circumstances and to move on. And so I think people are doing a lot of effort, entrepreneurs at the moment. They are, of course, many of them are benefiting from these public support schemes. but I don't know if so. At some point, um, it has to be some equilibrium between just keeping this situation um, and or maybe open it a little bit. So I think the solution will be just opening a little bit, and people could work for some period with all the precautions and all that, and then maybe another period at home without working. So it's going to be this episodic, let's say, uh, formula, I would say, because I think we cannot totally open and start working again, like and forget about what's happening. But we cannot, of course, stay home forever. So it has to be some optimal point here, and I think policymakers have of course, a fundamental role here. They play a very important role because they have to decide if what to do, right? If they are going to open a little bit, if they are going to open totally, and so this is being very much debated, not also in Portugal, but in all the countries, right? What is the economic impact of these? And so, as I told you, my message of hope is very much connected uh, to the fact that this is cyclical, and I think we have to believe that it's going to be better, and we have to do this effort now. And also, I'm very much happy with the fact that, as I told you before, uh, policymakers, researchers, academics, everybody is contributing somehow. I see many companies in Portugal totally shifting their core business, their not business, but their production, and adapting machines and to build or to produce something that is important for nurses, for doctors. So they are contributing the way they can, and also regular citizens. So I see in my neighborhood, I see people volunteering for I know to help older people who are alone. They just buy food and take them. So I've been doing that as well, and also at different levels. So we need to be very creative and find ways of contributing and of mitigating this problem, even if it's something very small. I think in aggregate terms, it will work if each one of us just do whatever we can to help. And this is also a moment of deep learning for everybody about ourselves as individuals and ourselves as a collective, right? So I think these concepts of shared economy, circular economy, frugal innovation, they are very, very much important right now because they help us understanding that we depend on each other, and we can all be better off if we collaborate instead of competing, right? And so this is very nice. I think this is an historical moment. Of course, it's not nice for the best reasons, but I think we have to learn out of this, and I think we will overcome this because we have. I think the knowledge we have is sufficient to deal with the problem in the next months. So we already start hearing about vaccine, about treatments for the problem. So I think people are mobilizing really fast, and also information. And I think it's very easy nowadays uh, to overcome these information asymmetries. So everybody knows that in real time what's happening, how many cases you have in Portugal, how many cases you have in US, in London, how things are evolving each minute. So we can actually follow. So, and that information is precious for us to act and to build solutions, right, collectively. So I think this is very interesting period in history, and we are learning a lot, and I just hope that we can get out of this problem as a better society and not the opposite. Let's see what's happening.
Well, that's a fantastic way to finish, and I think, well, we could go for hours, but I think we'll wrap up here. So, Miguel, last thing,
I speak a lot.
No, it's great. Well, that's the idea. Not just speaking a lot. This is actually very important things. It's just the format of 1 hour, because normally 1 hour is for video. It's very important. So, in terms of where people can find you, and there's the information about the Frugal Innovation and different projects about INT, can you just let us that? We'll put, of course, this on the profile of the interview, and they will be distributed through citiesabc.com, but as well in intelligenthq.com and openbusinesscouncil.org, where we're going to have as well a bio about yours. But can you tell us a bit about where people can find you, special information about Frugal Innovation projects you've been doing in India, which I think is very important for our global audience?
Okay, so as I told you, this is a recent project, the Social Innovation Lab, and we have a web page. We are on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, so all these social media, and I think something interesting. We were about to prepare this summer school with students from India and from Portugal and from other countries in the world, but we had to cancel because of COVID. But we are postponing this event for later, and I can give you some information on that. So we are also going to do this hackathon involving people from many countries working on frugal solutions. So these are just things that I think people can follow, and whenever we are ready to do this summer school and this hackathon, I think it would be nice for everybody to join and to discuss ideas with us about social impact, about frugal innovation and all these issues. So basically, people can find us at IST in the Social Innovation Lab, and that's what we've been doing.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate the time and actually the insightful, and I think especially the angle between the academic, the policies, and as well the projects and your research in particular. You are as well going to be a contributor for citiesabc.com, so we're going to be hearing from you in the platform in other webinars and projects, and people will be able to access you and as well. Okay, well, thank you so much, Miguel. It's been an honor and pleasure, and I think there's a lot of interesting things here that we'll be pushing on the video and as well as the text that will accompany it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.